If you're a teacher and you have a student with a visual impairment, a very important practice to implement are tactile graphics. Tactile graphics are images that use raised surfaces so a visually impaired person can feel them. They are used to convey non-textual information such as maps, diagrams, and graphs. They should be used when students cannot read text and it can't be described using words. It should also be used when the shape of an object is significant to understanding. There are very formal tactile graphics called swell graphics, and these use microcapsule paper and a heat machine, but not all schools will have this technology and you may not have the budget for it, so I'm going to show you a cheap alternative, which is another effective tactile graphic. These are tactile graphic collages. These are using craft supplies to raise the outlines or images on a piece of paper and highlight important parts of the diagram. If you have the technology to create an embossed braille key on your image or graph, that would be ideal. If you don't, you can verbalize with the student and communicate what each texture and item means. So as you can see, I have a few different craft supplies here, and I'm going to show you how to make these images tactile graphics. I have string, I have sandpaper, I have this pearl sheet, I've used popsicle sticks, and we're also going to use hot glue, regular glue, puffy paint, things like that. Many of these items are very cheap. You can buy things at the dollar store. You can use leftover supplies from other art projects. So first I'm going to start with showing you a hot glue gun. So if this is the line on the paper, you're going to use the hot glue gun to push hot glue onto the paper in a very straight and try to be a smooth line. For example, starting at one end and continuously following the line with the hot glue so that when it dries, it's a raised lane that a visual impaired student could feel. You can also use regular Elmer's glue. Elmer's glue dries to be raised on paper also. So for example, you can start here and trace the shape with the Elmer's glue. Try to be as accurate as possible and without putting any air bubbles in it. This way it'll dry smooth so that the student can move their finger over it and feel the shape that's desired. Finally, puffy paint is another material that can be used. So, puffy paint again, same thing as the glue and hot glue. You'd push it on the line. Try to be as accurate as possible. This is just a demonstration, so it's not going to be perfect. But when you're doing it in class, and if you do it often, you'll get the hang of making them straight and accurate. So you would wait until these things can dry. So if you're implementing this in class, you should have this prepared at least a day ahead of time so that it has time to dry and you can make sure that a student will be able to feel the raised lines. For things like a circle, you could use string. You could put glue down on the circle and you could trace the string and glue the string onto the paper to demonstrate that outline. It's important to use appropriate materials. So you wouldn't cut a circle out of cardboard to show a circle. You would want to just show the outline of the circle that's on the paper. So using string, or again, using hot glue, white glue, or puffy paint would be effective in showing the circle. Now you can use random supplies that you have around the classroom, such as this little mesh bag. I could trace this triangle in the bag and cut it out and then glue the fabric onto the paper. This is so that a student could drag their finger over the triangle, feel the shape of the triangle in a textured material. It's also important to use tactile graphics when the material and content that you're trying to teach requires the use or requires the knowledge of different shapes. For example, if you're teaching different types of triangles, such as an obtuse triangle or an equilateral triangle, it's important to show the difference and have students understand that an equilateral triangle has all acute angles. Now, a student with a visual impairment may not be able to see this on the board, so using a tactile graphic, tracing the outline, and either putting a textured material on it or just using the outline will make the student be able to feel the obtuse angle and feel the acute angles in these triangles. Now I'm going to show you how to implement this using a graph. So this is really important because a lot of graphs or diagrams in class need to be seen to be understood, while a student with a visual impairment who can't see these graphs needs an alternative. So I've cut out 3 different materials that I can place onto this graph, and I can just use glue to glue these items on. And each item needs to represent a different amount. So I shouldn't be using sandpaper for all 3 because that feels the same and it wouldn't show that student the difference between the 3 values. Now again, like I mentioned, if you have the technology to create Braille keys, this is where you could put a key. For example, if this is representing a country, in Braille you could put the country that each of these are representing. If you don't have that technology, as a teacher, you should adapt and explain what each material is. So when you give this graph to your student with a visual impairment, you could say the sandpaper represents this, the popsicle sticks represent this, and the dotted pearl paper represents this. It could also be important to use hot glue, Elmer's glue, or puffy paint to outline the edges of the graph. This shows the student what a graph is and then the 3 different bars that go with it. This is an important way to implement the strategy to make it effective and appropriate in class, because a student, again, with a visual impairment won't be able to see these graphs on the board and they need an accommodation. This is a cheap and easy way to accommodate that student so that they're not missing out on the graph and so that you don't have to explain the height to the entire class, because now that student can feel it and can feel the relationship between the 3 values. Thank you.